bright on one side and very dark on the other. It's one of the most intriguing bodies. And it's where, by the way, Arthur C. Clarke put the monolith in the book version, 2001. So I got to know, I believe he had to know there must have been something strange about Iapetus. And it turns out there is indeed. This is the first time we were looking at the dark face of Iapetus. Even with Voyager, we couldn't do this. And you see that it's heavily cratered, which tells us right away it's an ancient surface. And that wiped out, as soon as we saw this picture, it wiped out a whole class of explanations for why one side of this moon was dark. And we have seen the boundary between the dark and the bright now looking quite feathered. And we think probably the best hypothesis for how this moon got this way is that dark material was placed on this leading hemisphere from the outside. And that's about all right now that we know. We've collected some gorgeous images. Here is a fantastic landslide in a crater with a cliff about 15 kilometers high. So maybe 50 years from now, when we are taking extreme excursions into the Saturn system, perhaps on spacecraft that Peter has funded, if you or your children or your grandchildren are interested in ice climbing, this is going to be the ticket. Okay, so above all the icy moons of Saturn, most of them are heavily cratered, but one of them has stuck out for years now. We knew from the ground that Enceladus, which is only about 500 kilometers across, was very bizarre. It was as white, almost completely white all over, which is very peculiar. No other object in the solar system was this white, and it was bright. It reflects nearly all the light that falls on it. Again, very unusual for a solar system body. And so we had suspicions that Enceladus was going to be very intriguing when Cassini got there, and we certainly have not been disappointed. We find first that when you examine it in false color, when you really, really stretch the color as much as you can, as I said, it's pretty colorless, we find that something peculiar about the cracks on the surface. Okay, it's different than the rest of the body. And when we looked at even closer up to Enceladus, it was just incredibly bizarre. This is what the surface of Enceladus looks like. I think you would agree. It looks nothing like the cratered moons that I showed you before. It is obviously a young surface. It shows generations of fractures and tectonics, not plate tectonics, but nonetheless fractures. We have folds of mountains here. And looking at it even finer scale, we see more and more fractures. We see fractures that bifurcate craters. This is a crater here that has been somewhat eroded, and you can see fractures across it. And it was so intriguing to us that this last July we tweaked the orbit of Cassini enough to bring us only 175 kilometers over the south pole of the body.